The air was thick in the service hall, a wet heap pressed down by rusted pipes and humming fluorescent strips that flickered unevenly overhead. Fans whined as they pushed stale air in circles, never quite cutting the smell of boiled tea, skin, and old cleaning solvent. The walls sweated with condensation, slick streaks glinting in the half-light. A line of women stood barefoot against the stained concrete, ceremonial silks draped across their bodies in tatters once symbols of celebration, now knotted crudely to reveal more than they covered. Their bare feet left damp prints on the floor, prints that never seemed to dry. The merchants called them bed warmers, repeating the phrase until it ate through memory and name alike, until it became the only word left. Kira stood among them. Her skin shifted under the harsh light, blue with undertones of green gold that shimmered faintly when the angle was right. Her long black hair clung to her back in tangled waves, damp from sweat, uncared for. Yet her posture was straight, her lips pressed together, her amber eyes unyielding. She did not lower her gaze like the others. She had been sold and rented for years, measured by the heat of her skin, the curve of her frame, the pliancy of her body, but she had never let them break her eyes. Inside her chest, fear curled tight, always present, but her mind worked quietly. If a chance ever came, as she ran, how far could she get before they caught her? If she refused a client, would they starve her again? Each thought was calculated, stored, weighed, never forgotten. She expected nothing except the next set of hands, the next face, the next transaction. The dented steel door groaned open. Light from the corridor spilled in, brief and sharp, before being swallowed by the hall's gloom. A man stepped inside, not drifting like the others who came for flesh, not swaggering like the merchants who sold it. He carried himself with squared shoulders, posture steady, chin lifted, as if he still walked patrol. Morgan Vale was in his early 40s, but his bearing was sharper than the men around him. Once he had been a Federation scout, trained to map hostile ground and survive where others faltered. That discipline had not left him, even though his years now were spent as a cartographer, mapping trade flows and shipment routes for administrators who would never walk in places like this. He moved with purpose, eyes scanning the hall in one-sweep exits, cameras, the weight of men leaning near the counter. He was not here by chance. The merchants spotted him, their grins widening. One called out, voice rough, "You look like you know value." This one runs hot, never complains. Good deal. They gestured toward the women, toward Kira. The laughter that followed scraped like knives across her nerves. She kept her gaze on the far door, jaw tight. She did not expect rescue. She expected another hand, another night, another rental, Morgan's. Eyes landed on her and did not look away. He saw the bruises near her collarbone, the torn silk knotted too high on her thigh. He saw how she stood straight, unbroken, and how she met his gaze without flinching. In her eyes he saw not submission, but the last sharp edge of pride. He crossed to the counter, boots scraping slow across the damp floor. His voice, when it came, was calm, level, with the firmness of someone who had rehearsed silence until it became armor. "What is her name?" The room shifted. Men laughed, the sound bitter. "No one asks names here." One jeered. "You can call her whatever you want. That's what you're paying for." The merchant tapped his slate, smirking. Kira's voice cut the air sharp. Too fast, too raw. "My name is not for sale." The words snapped before she could stop. Them. Regret coiled in her chest immediately. Speaking out earned punishment here. She braced for it, but Morgan didn't flinch. He pulled a credit stick from his pocket and slid it across the counter. His eyes hardened, his voice unshaken. "I want a release." The clerk frowned, confused. "You mean a rental?" "A release," Morgan repeated, Labor release. Form 217. He tapped the laminated guide stuck crookedly behind the counter. The merchant's grin faltered. Few buyers knew the bureaucratic codes. He tried to turn it into a joke. That form's for decommissioning equipment. She isn't equipment, Morgan said. The words came low, cutting. Print it. The printer whirred reluctantly. A thin sheet slid out, the green seal stamped at the bottom. A penalty fee flashed on the register twice the price of a night. The merchant leaned in, amused. You know this charges you double. I'll pay, Morgan said. His tone carried no room for debate. The pen was pushed toward Kira. Her hands shook as she picked it up. She hadn't written anything in years. The boxes blurred at first name, date, condition. For a heartbeat, she almost threw it back, screaming that it changed nothing. But the part of her that had been planning escape for months, rehearsing the idea in silence, pushed her forward. Slowly, carefully, she wrote, Kira. Each letter was sharp, deliberate, trembling but real. The merchant mocked softly. Pretty letters won't change what you are. Kira looked him dead in the eye, a paper still warm in her hand. For the first time in years, something inside her shifted. The paper said something different. She was no longer a rental. She was no longer an object passed across counters. Morgan reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded thermal cloak. He offered it without comment. Kira studied him, waiting for the catch, waiting for the demand that always came. But his face gave nothing away. She took the cloak, the fabric stiff and smelling faintly of resin, and pulled it around her shoulders. For the first time in years, she stood at the threshold with her own name written in ink, and the door to daylight open, and she walked toward it, trembling, furious, but unbroken. The sunlight outside struck like a hammer after the hall's gloom. White brilliance spilled across the pavement, making Kira squint and pull the cloak tighter around her shoulders. The air was no cleaner here, only hotter, rising off the concrete in shimmering waves. Above, glass towers glittered in perfect order, drones tracing silent arcs through the sky, citizens moving along elevated walkways in neat streams. It was the same city she had lived beneath for years, yet it looked alien, too bright, too distant, too UNBO2HERED. Her bare feet burned against the pavement, each step sending a pulse of heat up her legs. She kept waiting for the familiar grasp. On her arm, the command to stop, the merchants dragging her back into shadow. But none came. The law, for once, had teeth in her favor. The paper in her hand creased already from how tightly she clutched. It was shield enough. Still, the disbelief lodged hard in her chest. She almost couldn't breathe from it. Behind her, Morgan walked with the same steady pace he had carried. Into the hall. He didn't touch her. He didn't lead. He simply followed half a step behind, scanning the crowd as if every passerby were a line on a map to be read. It unsettled her more than the laughter of the merchants had. Men never gave. Space. Men crowded, claimed, pressed in until there was no air left. His distance was sharp, deliberate, and Kira hated how it made her chest tighten. A group of office clerks passed, arms full of slates and styluses. None of them looked twice at her. No one cared about a woman in a stiff cloak with bare, bruised feet. The anonymity was almost more shocking than chains. She kept her eyes forward, amber gaze hard, daring anyone to stop her. No one did. At the corner, Morgan's voice broke the silence, low and precise. Public wash is 2 blocks. Food after. Then close. His words were not commands, but markers, like stones placed on a path. She slowed, suspicious. And then? She asked. He didn't hesitate. Then my place, if you choose. Her steps faltered, the crowd flowing past her like water around a rock. She spun, the cloak twisting close around her throat. If I choose? You expect me to believe this isn't just another trade? Her voice was raw, sharper than she intended. For years, every exchange had come with a price. She couldn't imagine. This one didn't. Morgan's expression didn't shift. His posture remained disciplined, unshaken. He nodded once at the paper clenched in her fist. That is legal. You're free on paper and in practice. I'm not your handler. His gaze didn't waver. There's a 24-hour window where the hall can contest, but they almost never do. Too much paperwork. Either way, you won't go back. Her pulse hammered at the words. She studied his face, searching for the hook, the demand, the twist. His eyes gave nothing away, only calm conviction, like a man who had decided his course. Before stepping into the hall, and had no intention of shifting now, the heat swelled off the pavement. Kira pulled the cloak higher, the fabric scratchy against her chin. She didn't thank him. She didn't dare. Gratitude had been beaten into her too many times, twisted into another tool of control. Instead, she said nothing, only walked again. One step after another, testing the ground with her burned feet, daring the city to stop her. Morgan matched her pace without comment. His eyes slid over the walkways, the drones, the corner cameras with broken casings. He read the city like he had read the hall, quietly, efficiently, without pause. For Kira, every step away from the steel door felt both impossible and too fragile. To trust, the world outside didn't notice her. The world outside didn't care. And maybe, just maybe, that indifference was the closest thing to freedom she had ever touched. When they reached the cross street, a stall hissed with boiling water, the scent of ginger and fried bread catching on the wind. Kira froze, the memory sharp and sudden. Once, as a child, she had smelled something like it, but never tasted it. Her throat tightened painfully. She forced herself to turn away before the longing showed. But Morgan had already noticed the flicker in her eyes. He didn't comment. He simply logged the detail, the way a cartographer marked an uncharted landmark, and walked on. 2 more blocks. The wash house waited. And with it, the first real threshold of her new life, the moment she would strip away not just silk and grime, but the last visible stain of the hall. She wasn't sure she was ready. But she knew she would step through anyway. The public washhouse rose from the street like a block of gray stone, functional and unadorned, its walls streaked with years of mineral runoff from the pipes above. Steam hissed faintly from vents near. The roof, carrying the sharp scent of antiseptic soap and wet stone. The door groaned as Kira pushed it open, the cloak dragging along her shoulders. Inside, rows of numbered stalls stretched in neat order, each marked by a steel plate and a faint glow from the sensor strip. The air was thick with moisture, but it was clean, not the recycled filth of the hall, but something neutral, simple. Behind a Plex shield, an attendant sat stamping time slips, eyes glazed from monotony. She looked up only when Morgan laid the release form against the counter. Her gaze flicked to the green seal, then to Kira's face, and something in her posture shifted from boredom to carefulness. "Stall 8, she said softly. She slid a mesh bag through the slot soap, solvent, a comb, antiseptic pads. Then she added a small razor without comment. Morgan paid before Kira could protest. 2 kits, he said evenly, and a towel. Set. Kira clutched the mesh bag and walked toward the indicated stall. The number gleamed faintly against the damp wall. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was narrow but bright, light panels humming evenly above. A drain in the center, a spray head at the wall, hooks for clothing. The floor was slick with condensation, cool under her bare feet. She hung the cloak on a hook, fingers lingering on its stiff fabric, and turned to the silks. The knots were tight, tied hard from habit, from years of fastening them, so they wouldn't slip during transactions. Her hands trembled as she worked them loose. When the fabric finally slid down, her body shook, not from cold, but from the weight of being exposed, even to no one. She pressed both palms against the tiled wall until the trembling steadied. Then she stepped under the spray and twisted the knob. Water burst out, warm and heavy, striking her shoulders and cascading down. The shock of it made her gasp. For years, her baths had been a rag dipped in a bucket, a splash of stale water in the dark. This was different. The spray was steady, constant, almost overwhelming. She closed her eyes, tilted her face into it, and for the first time in years, felt grime and old oil wash away in streams. Foam rose as she scrubbed with the solvent, lifting the inked dye seal on her hip. The hall had called it a mark of ownership, but it was little more than oil and pigment pressed into skin. She worked at it until her fingers ached, until the solvent stung. The blue-green of her natural skin emerged beneath, clean and unbranded. She winced, but she didn't stop. The pain was worth the sight of the mark dissolving, breaking apart and circling the drain. Her fingers found bruises she had ignored, scars half-healed, a rough patch near her knee. She scrubbed harder until the skin reddened. Then, unexpectedly, a short laugh escaped her. It was small, startled, the sound of something ridiculous and tender. She had remembered that knees mattered, that her body was more than what others demanded from it. Through the door came Morgan's voice, steady but distant. "Clothes are on the bench. I'm at the counter, not the door." His precision in words made her throat tighten. He was careful with lines she didn't even know she needed. She hated that she needed them, but she also hated how much relief washed through her at hearing them. "Good," she answered, louder than intended. "Stay there." "Understood." She lingered under the spray until her skin felt new, until the grime that had clung like memory was gone. When she finally shut the water off, the silence rang in her ears. She dried with the towel, fingers steadier now, and opened the mesh bag. The comb dragged through tangles, slow and painful at first, then smoother. She watched hair fall into place, strands shaping into something that looked like her again, not like a product waiting in a line. For 3 heartbeats, she let herself feel it. Let the mirror reflect a person instead of a possession. Then the old voice whispered inside her, "Nothing is free, nothing is yours." She pushed it down hard. Not today. Not yet. The clothing was simple. Black work pants with a stretch panel, a soft gray shirt, a plain wrap that could serve as a jacket. The shirt hung loose, sleeves too long, but she rolled them up. The pants fit. She tied her old silk around her waist as a belt, not a uniform anymore. Not trash, but hers. She met her own gaze in the mirror, amber eyes clear, and for the first time did not flinch. When she stepped out, the attendant behind the plex pretended not to stare, but failed. Her voice dropped, almost gentle. "You'll want shoes." She pointed toward the kiosk outside. Kira nodded once. "Thanks." The woman's eyes flicked to form in Kara's hand, and then back to her face. She lowered her voice even more. "Keep that release on top." Kira's lips tightened. She swallowed the sudden burn in her throat. "I will." Morgan stood waiting by the wall, gaze steady, posture unreadable. He hadn't moved. He hadn't tried to look. He only nodded once when their eyes met. For the first time in years, Kira walked out of a washhouse with clean skin, a name on paper, and a silk belt tied by her own hand. The city beyond the door still gleamed with indifference, but she felt the ground beneath her boots to be, and for once, it felt like ground she might actually claim. The registry building stood like a slab of polished glass among the towers, its edges sharp against the skyline, its walls humming faintly with a churn of ventilation. Kira hesitated at the threshold, the release form clutched so tight her knuckles whitened. The door was automatic, opening with a soft sigh, but she felt as though crossing it would be harder than stepping into daylight had been. Inside, the air was cool, sterilized, carrying the faint tongue of ozone and machine oil. Counters stretched. In long rows, each shielded by thick panes of plex, clerks sitting behind consoles, with their eyes dulled by endless paperwork. Lines of citizens wound between marked rails, forms in hand, their movements orderly and indifferent. Kira's stomach clenched. Memories slammed back, the shuffle of bare feet in another line, the snap of a stamp pressed to her wrist, the cold sting of dye sealing away her name. Her lungs seized, and for an instant she nearly turned back. But then she felt Morgan's presence at her side, solid and unyielding. He didn't touch her, but his voice came low, steady. Stay close. Not in order, just an anchor. The words steadied her more than she wanted to admit. She stepped forward, bare soles sticking slightly, to the smooth floor, and the line advanced until the plex counter loomed above them. The clerk barely looked up, her voice flat with repetition. Form. Kira slid the release across, her fingers trembling. The clerk scanned it, her brow furrowing. A faint light blinked red on her console. She tapped a few commands, then looked. Up with a frown. Release filed, but flagged. Contest pending. The words hit Kira like a lash. Her breath came sharp, her throat tightening until she couldn't swallow. Contest. They were coming for her. Her body wanted to run, to bolt from the line, but her legs froze. Morgan's voice cut through before panic could consume her. Calm, precise, the way a blade slid between seams. On what grounds? The clerk's tone remained flat, but she glanced between them as if weighing something. Filed by Merchant Consortium. Claim of improper decommission. They allege form. 217 is misapplied. Invalid, Kira whispered. Her voice broke. They'll take me back. Morgan shook his head once, not looking at her, eyes fixed on the clerk. They won't. Labor release is legal under subsection 3, clause 9. Human or not, you've logged it. The clerk hesitated, fingers pausing on the console. Morgan leaned in slightly, not threatening, just unflinching. Run the metadata. Signature scan, timestamp, seal. Everything holds. The woman sighed, fingers tapping quickly. Lines of data scrolled across the screen, green lights flicking one after another. Seal matches? Timestamp confirmed. Contest will go to secondary review. Kira's chest heaved, her pulse pounding. She barely heard the words until Morgan's hand rested briefly, not on her, but on the counter, steady, close enough for her to see the calm in his scarred knuckles. Secondary review takes weeks, he said softly, as if speaking only to her. By then, your ID will be issued. They can file, but they can't erase you. The clerk pulled out a thin plastic card, blank but glowing faintly. Occupation? She asked, her voice bored again. The question froze Kira more than anything had yet. Her mouth went dry. Occupation. She had none. She had only ever been independent labor, Morgan said smoothly. His tone was matter of fact, unquestionable. General registry. The clerk nodded, typed it in, and gestured to the scanner. Thumb. Iris. Kira stared at the machine, her entire body locked. The last time she had pressed her thumb to one of these, her name had been stripped away. Panic clawed her ribs. What if it sends me back? She whispered, her voice ragged. It won't. Morgan's voice came low, steady, certain. Do. It. Her hands shook, but she pressed her thumb down. The machine beeped, light flashing green. She lifted her chin, amber eyes burning, and let the scanner read them. Blue light swept across her gaze, and she refused to blink. A soft chirp filled the silence, and the clerk slid the finished card across the counter. Kira stared at it, breath caught in her throat. Her name was printed in black letters, sharp and undeniable. Kira, not bedwarmer, not unit, not merchandise. Her name. Her fingers closed around the card, holding it as if it might vanish. Her chest ached, her throat raw. She didn't thank thee. Clerk, she didn't need to. She stepped back from the counter, clutching the card in both hands like a shield. Outside, the sunlight seemed brighter, the air sharper. She stopped on the pavement, staring at the plastic card again and again, afraid that if she blinked, it would disappear. It didn't. It was real. It was hers. Morgan stood beside her, quiet, unhurried. He didn't reach for her. He didn't speak until she turned to him, her voice cracking. What if I can't do anything with this? What if I fail? His reply came steady, unshaken. Then you try again. Failure now means you start over, not that you get sold. That's the difference. The words landed heavy, so heavy she turned away so he wouldn't see the sting in her eyes. The card bit into her palm, proof of a life she wasn't sure she could hold. For the first time in years, the fear inside her twisted into something new, something she almost dared to name. Hope. Morgan's building was older than the glass towers that gleamed above the city. Its concrete walls were painted white, but dulled with time. Balconies staggered like steps, humming faintly with the sound of cooling vents. The hallway smelled faintly of solvent and metal polish, ordinary and lived in. For Kira, it felt unnervingly quiet. No shouted orders, no echo of boots, no laughter curling with cruelty. Just silence and the faint hum of distant traffic. His unit was halfway up. The door slid open with a soft click, and he stepped aside, letting her cross the threshold. First. Inside, the room was small but functional. One bed, neatly made with a folded blanket. A desk crowded with map tiles and projection plates. A chair near the window. The cooktop was clean, the counters bare. It was a space built for discipline. Not comfort, but every corner was his. Kira hesitated just inside the door, cloak tight around her. She scanned the room with sharp eyes, the same way she always scanned new spaces. Latch on the door, window size, bathroom location. Normal fear checks, done quickly. She hated how automatic they were. But Morgan didn't comment, didn't interrupt. He only watched, hands steady at his sides, as if waiting for her to decide what came next. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small flat pouch. Medical kit, he said simply. If you want me out of the room, say so. I can handle it. The offer disarmed her more than if he had pressed close. She took the kit, her hands steadying with the weight of it, and slipped into the bathroom. The light there was bright, even. She sat on the small counter, opened the kit, and began to clean herself properly. An antiseptic pad stung against the bruise on her shoulder. She pried a tiny splinter from her foot, breathing through the pain, then pressed a strip of adhesive down with care. The mirror above the sink caught her eyes, amber, raw, alive. She didn't look away. For the first time, tending to her own wounds felt like claiming something. When she emerged, Morgan had rearranged the room. The chair had been pulled to the window, a blanket folded neatly on the floor beside it. On the bed lay a spare shirt, folded, with a note scrawled in block letters, "Use, don't ask." His handwriting was sharp, blunt, like everything else about him. Kira picked up the shirt, laughed once under her breath at the awkward directness, and set it back. Her laughter startled her. It had been years since a sound like that had escaped. She sat on the edge of the bed, cloak wrapped tight, eyes sweeping the room again. Morgan stood by the desk, powering down his map wall, the pale lines of trade. Roots fading into darkness. "You live alone," she said finally. "Yes," he answered. His tone carried no apology. "By choice. Why? I like quiet. I like deciding what I do when I do it. I don't sleep well when someone expects me to be someone else." The words pierced sharper than he might have known. Expectation. As Lishi, she understood that too well. She looked down at her hands, fingers twisting the cloak fabric tight. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't oppressive. It was strange, almost breathing. She forced herself to ask what clawed at her. Chest. There's still that contest window. What if they tried to take me back? They might file again, he said, his voice even. If they do, I'll counter. If they push harder, I'll call someone in records who hates sloppy filings. They'll bury it in process. You'll be fine. Why do you know all this? He hesitated only a second. I used to scout for the Federation. You learn to read systems, not just maps. The fastest road is usually on paper. She studied him, suspicion, still sharp in her veins. What else had he seen? What else did he carry? But she didn't push, not tonight. The exhaustion was too deep. She lay back on the bed, cloak pulled high to her chin, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Morgan stretched out on the floor near the chair, blanket pulled to his waist. He didn't look at her. He didn't stir. He simply closed his eyes, posture disciplined, even in rest. His stillness unnerved her more than if he had reached for her. Men always reached. Men always took. His restraint was unfamiliar, frightening in its own way. Her chest tightened. She turned toward him, words slipping out before she could stop them. Why haven't you touched me? Every other. She cut herself short, breath catching. His eyes opened at once, calm, steady. Because I'm not them. And because I said, the rule doesn't change. You ask, I answer, not before. The room went still. Kira's heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. For years, touch had been demand, transaction, inevitability. Now it sat in her hands, terrifying in its weight. She pressed her face into the cloak, hot with something she couldn't name, and whispered, I don't know what I want. Morgan's answer came quiet, unshaken. Then you wait until you do. The words hung between them like a lifeline. She lay there in silence, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, and realized it was steadier than any promise. For the first time in years, no hand reached in the dark, no command shattered the quiet. The choice was hers, frightening and fragile, but real. And that, more than the release form or the ID card, was the thing that made her tremble. The morning light was pale and thin when Kira woke, filtering through the blinds and painting narrow stripes across the walls. For a moment she lay still, disoriented by silence. No heavy footsteps, no metallic clang of locks, no rough hand shaking her awake. Only the faint hum of the city outside and the steady rhythm of Morgan's breathing from the floor. Her pulse hammered, waiting for the intrusion that never came. Slowly she sat up, cloak tangled around her waist, her new ID card still on the desk within reach. The plastic caught the light like a shard of glass. Morgan stirred, stretching once before rising to his feet. Even half asleep, his movements were precise, disciplined lines, no wasted motion. He rolled the blanket tight, set it back in the drawer, and looked at her without speaking. His quiet unnerved her more than words would have. He moved as though nothing needed explaining, as though everything he did was deliberate, chosen. They ate in silence, bread warmed on the cooktop, sliced fruit laid between them. Kira ate slowly, savoring each bite, waiting for the catch, waiting for him to name a price. None came. He only nodded toward the ID card. Registry lists, contests. At mid-shift, we'll check. Her chest tightened. And if they filed again? His tone didn't change, and we counter. And if they try harder, we bury them in process. You're not going back. The words were delivered without drama, without oath. They were simple fact, and somehow that certainty was heavier than a promise. By mid-shift, the streets were crowded. Workers streamed in steady lines, drones humming overhead, signs flashing with schedules and notices. Kira pulled her cloak tighter, boots scuffing against the pavement. She could feel eyes skimming over her, not stopping, not marking her as different. It was both relief and shock. The registry plaza loomed ahead, glass walls gleaming. Morgan slowed, scanning the space as if reading a battlefield. Kira followed his gaze, and then saw it. A compliance drone hovered near the steps, its black shell gleaming, optic sensors shifting with mechanical precision. Beside it stood a man in the gray sash of a merchant consortium clerk, holding a data slate tight against his chest. The sight froze her. Fear surged sharp and choking. "They came," she whispered. Her grip tightened on the cloak until her knuckles ached. "They'll take me back." "Stay with me?" Morgan said. His voice was quiet, controlled, but there was iron underneath. The clerk spotted them and stepped forward, drone buzzing in tandem. His voice was sharp, official. "This release is invalid. Subject is equipment misfiled under civilian code. She is to be remanded pending correction." Kira's chest collapsed. The words hit like a blow, all breath stolen at once. The drone's optic locked on her, red light flickering. She wanted to run, but her legs refused. She was a line in a ledger again, nothing more. But Morgan stepped forward, shoulders squared, voice cutting like steel. "No. Form 217 filed, seal verified, timestamp logged. Secondary review already in process. You're out of jurisdiction." The clerk sneered. "This form was never meant for labor release under subsection 3. Clause 9, Morgan interrupted, voice sharp enough to slice through the crowd's hum. "Equipment or not, it applies. Metadata attached, signature confirmed." He pulled a folded copy of the release from his satchel, smooth and deliberate, and held it up. "Challenge it if you want. You'll drown in filings before you finish the header." The drone whirred, its optic flickering. For a moment, the air hung thick with tension. Kira could hear her own pulse in her ears, could taste bile at the back of her throat. She braced for the shock of cold metal clamps on her arms. Then the drone's light blinked green. It retracted its scanners with a mechanical chirp and lifted slowly into the air. The clerk's sneer faltered as the machine ascended, vanishing into the upper streets. He muttered something bitter under his breath, tapped angrily at his slate, and turned away. The plaza's noise filled the silence again, citizens moving, drones humming, announcements echoing overhead. No one cared what had just happened. No one saw how Kira's knees nearly buckled, how she had to clutch the cloak at her throat to keep from collapsing. Morgan stood steady beside her, lowering the release form without flourish. His voice came low, for her alone. "They'll try again, but you hold the paper. You hold your name. That's enough." Kira turned her face to him, amber eyes blazing through the fear. She wanted to believe. She needed to believe. And for the first time in years, she felt the smallest flicker of defiance turn outward. No longer aimed only at survival. She wasn't property anymore. As they walked away from the plaza, her steps matched his for the first time, not half a pace behind, not dragging in dread. Equal. And though her hands still trembled, though fear still lingered, she carried her ID card like a blade. Not fragile, not temporary. Hers. And deep inside, beneath the fear, something new began to take shape. A seed of resolve, raw but real. If the merchants came again, she would not meet them with lowered eyes. Not anymore. Night settled over North Glass in a hush of neon reflections and the faint hum of distant shuttles. From Morgan's window, the city gleamed with quiet precision glass. Towers catching the last glow of day, drones blinking like restless stars between them. Inside the small apartment, the light was softer, dim panels casting a steady warmth across the walls. Kira sat on the edge of the bed, her cloak draped across her shoulders, her new ID card resting on the table within arm's reach. She had checked it so many times the plastic was warm from her touch, the letters of her name etched into her memory. She should have felt free. Yet the silence pressed in, thick with weight. Her body trembled with every shift of thought. Freedom had teeth. It was too large, too fragile, too easily shattered. She pulled the cloak tighter and whispered into the room, her voice rough with fear she hadn't spoken aloud before. What if I never stop feeling like property? What if I can't be anything else? Morgan sat on the floor as he always did, back against the chair, posture precise, blanket folded across his legs. He didn't look at her right away. When he did, his eyes were steady, voice calm, stripped of ornament. Then you'll take time. Property doesn't get to ask that question. People do. You already proved you're not. The words lodged in her chest, heavier than comfort, harder than lies. She wanted to reject them, to argue, to protect herself from hope. Instead, her throat tightened until tears stung her eyes. She turned away so he wouldn't see. Minutes passed in silence, but it wasn't empty. His stillness filled it, not pressing, not demanding, just steady, unmovable. She hated it and needed it in the same breath. Finally, restless, she swung her legs off the bed and crossed the short space to him. Each step felt like stepping across glass. She sank to her knees in front of him, the cloak slipping off her shoulder. He noticed she could see it, but his eyes never dropped below her face. Her hand lifted, trembling in the air, then pressed lightly against his arm. The first touch she had chosen in years. Her heart pounded so hard, she thought she might break from it. I don't know how to do this, she whispered, her voice raw, without feeling like it's being taken from me. Then start small, Morgan said, his voice low, patient. You touch. I wait. The simplicity of it made her eyes burn. She pressed her hand more firmly against his arm, testing, waiting for him to seize it. He didn't. He stayed still, a rock in the current, letting her decide. The choice pressed against her like a tide. Her breath stuttered. She leaned forward, forehead brushing his shoulder. The warmth of him seeped through her, steady, real, unforced. His hand rose slowly, so slowly she could have pulled away at any moment, and rested lightly against her back. Not pulling, not claiming, just steadying. She stayed, trembling, but she didn't pull away. For the first time, intimacy felt like something that belonged to her. Her voice cracked against his shoulder. I don't want you to stop noticing me. I won't, he said. The blunt honesty struck harder than any vow. She drew back just enough to look at him, amber eyes wet and sharp. Then, with a breath that shook her chest, she pressed her lips against his. Soft, tentative, but hers. For the first time, no coin, no command, no demand. Only her will. She broke it quickly, overwhelmed, her face burning. That's all I can do right now, she said, voice barely audible. His reply was steady, unwavering. Then that's enough. The words shook her more than the kiss. She pulled the cloak around herself again, but this time she didn't retreat to the bed. She sat beside him on the floor, their arms brushing lightly. She didn't move away. The silence stretched, but it breathed now, alive, safe. Hours later, her head rested against his shoulder, her hand curled around the fabric of his sleeve. She drifted into sleep, not with panic, not bracing for footsteps, but with the weight of choice in her chest. When dawn crept across the blinds, She woke with the cloak tangled at her waist, and his steady breathing still beside her. She rose slowly, walked to the table, and picked up her ID card. The letters of her name gleamed in the morning light. She held it tight, then set it back down. Her voice, when it came, was raw but firm. "This means I'm free. But it doesn't tell me what to do with it." Morgan stood, stretching, his movements measured as always. "Then you decide. Work, travel, stay, leave. You write the rest." "I won't." She turned to him, amber eyes glistening. Her voice wavered, but the words landed like stone. "I don't want to write alone." He stepped closer, slow enough that she could stop him at any moment. He didn't touch her until she lifted her hands, pressing them against his chest. Her heart hammered, but she leaned forward, kissed him again, longer, steadier. This time not tentative, not trembling. A choice made in full. When she pulled back, her voice was clear, sharp, final. "I choose you, not because you bought me, not because you freed me, because I want to." His hand rose, settled gently along her jaw, steady as ever. "Then I choose you back." The words nearly undid her. For years she had been a body, a commodity, a name stripped and sold. But in that moment, standing in the quiet of a small room while the city hummed outside, she wasn't property. She wasn't a bed warmer. She was Kira chosen, and choosing in return. And that was the beginning. Not escape, not transaction. Something rarer. A life she could finally call her own.